Okay, so this is the setup. Granted, this is just what is carried over from World War II. But if you don't play World War II, there is a standard setup for it. So this is the first turn. So this would be spring 1946. And there's only two conflicts going on in the world right now. The Chinese Civil War resumes. The KMT and the CCP pretty much pick up right from where they left off during World War II. And Greece is in a civil war. It's the communist Greeks versus the Greek monarchists that are loyal to the monarchy. So obviously the communist Greeks are supported by the Soviet Union. The monarch Greeks are supported by England and the United States. How Greece works is it doesn't have a production, so it relies entirely off of lend-lease from their respective parent powers, so Soviets, the United States, and England. You see in the production, you see the roundels for the Warsaw Pact client states and the NATO client states don't have money. That's because they don't have a production either. They are 100% reliant on the respective parent powers to fund money to them so they can then build their stuff. The catch to that is if a power is officially at war, it cannot donate to its respective faction fund. So that will be a consideration on whether various major powers decide to intervene during proxy wars and whatnot. The Soviet income is split into two incomes. It is the original Russian territory, so this darker rust color, and then the Eastern Bloc satellite nations, which is this lighter rust color. And so they have separate production. They more or less have separate armies. They use the same Soviet pieces, but they are kind of more or less separate entities, almost. And so stuff the Eastern Bloc builds has to be built in this lighter color, maroon. Stuff the Soviets build has to be put in this darker rust color, and they can't intermix. The only time that they can intermix is if full-on World War III starts. And that's just kind of a balancing act to for when the Soviet-Afghan war starts, so the Soviets don't just have this overwhelming force that it can just send into Afghanistan and just completely overrun it in a single turn. So that's about it. This is a long game, so we won't be doing a turn-by-turn update. We'll just be doing updates once a major event happens, because this is a long game. But other than that, we will start cracking on the turns and come back with an update. See you then. Alright, we're at the spring of 1947, and just go left to right. So up top there, Israel is just building up its forces from the NATO fund. Let's see, in Europe, same thing. The United States has moved air transport into Germany, and it's got half of its B-29 fleet in Europe. Eastern Bloc countries building up their forces. Soviets doing the same, what little they can. Most of their production goes to the Warsaw Pact Fund, so they're not putting out too much on at the moment. The Soviets sent a KGB agent to Cuba and begun influencing it. Same thing. The United States sent a CIA agent to Latin America, began influencing it as well to flip it over to its side. The Greek Civil War continues. The monarch Greeks made an attack against communist Greeks and traded losses, one-for-one losses. This dice right here, it's got a 4 on it. That's signifying how many units NATO has leased to the monarchist Greeks. Because if NATO, particularly the United States and England, leases 8 units to monarch Greeks within a certain time limit, that will cause the Tito-Stalin split, cause Yugoslavia to break off from the Eastern Bloc countries. It won't join NATO, it'll just become an independent neutral. And that was because Tito thought that Stalin wasn't supporting the communist Greeks as well as he could have, and in protest he broke away from the Eastern Bloc, quote-unquote, Warsaw Pact, and kind of found and did his own thing. Surprisingly, Stalin didn't do anything about it, surprisingly. He just kind of let it go, but because very unusual for Stalin. He had no problems crushing pretty much everything else, but that one he let go for some reason. Arab states building up their forces. SAC doing the same. Here in China, the civil war between the nationalist KMT and the communist CCP is kind of stalemated a little bit. Last turn, CCP took a territory. Then they tried for Nanking and were repulsed, and then the nationalist KMT took 2 territories from the CCP, so they're about even right now. It's probably going to change, but and then various nations building up their navies. The Korea is doing the same. And then the event for this turn is the first, well, the Chinese Civil War is the first proxy war, but the second proxy war has begun. The French Indochina has rebelled against France, and the Indochinese rebels, they are able to secure North Vietnam, Laos, and South Vietnam right out of the gate. The only thing France holds is Cambodia. And these are colonial troops, one of the special units that France has. So another war has started. This is the third war on the map going currently, and this is a victory point for the Cold War, so as well as Chinese Civil War. So that's it for the turn. Not much going on because it's still so early in the Cold War, so there's not a whole lot going on at the moment. So we will do the turn and come back with an update. Alright, we're at the fall of 1947. And the Greek Civil War is continuing. Been pretty much trading even blows, even losses, 1 for 1. And most of the powers put down their first ships. Soviets, the British, all put down cruisers. The West Germans have put down a cruiser and a destroyer, along with some artillery. The United States moved its 2 air transports and an infantry over to West Germany. Eastern Bloc continuing to build up they've been concentrating on their air forces last couple turns. Soviets haven't been able to build much because virtually all their money is going to funding the various Warsaw Pact powers. Putting out more KGB. The Middle East, Israel continuing to build up, as well as the Arab states, and moving forces in to position for that upcoming war. Soviets continuing to influence Cuba. The United States continuing to influence Latin America. The United States won the first round of influencing South Africa, so they have a point there. The Chinese Civil War continues to go in the CCP's favor. Took the Central Territory here, and then drove down alongside the Himalayas, took another KMT territory. They tried for Nanking again and were repulsed again. Japan putting out a cruiser. United States putting out a cruiser. The Koreas continuing to build up. And French Indochina, the rebels attacked Stung Treng and pushed the French out. So the French lost a territory in Cambodia, or what will be Cambodia. And that's about it. So the new event for this turn is the First Indo-Pakistan War. So India is going to war with Pakistan. So another war springs up on the board. So that will make the 1, 2, 3, 4th war on the board. The Greek Civil War. Now the Indo-Pakistan War, Chinese Civil War, and the French Indochina Rebellion. So we will get cracking on that turn and come back with an update for the next event. See you then. Alright, we're in the spring of 1948, and the Greek Civil War continues apace. The monarchs launched an attack on the communists and almost wiped them out and won it. But because the British and the Americans have leased 8 units to the monarchs in the allotted window, Yugoslavia has broken off from the Eastern Bloc, and well, it's not actually joined NATO, it's more or less become an independent neutral, but the communist dictator of Yugoslavia, Tito, frustrated over what he perceived as Stalin's lack of commitment to the Greek communists, decided, well, piss on you, and broke off from the Eastern Bloc, and for some strange reason, Stalin allowed it. He didn't send troops down there to do a regime change, but Soviets and the Americans continuing to influence Cuba and Latin America respectively. The KGB does have a spy in New York now. Argentina put out a cruiser. French loaded up some artillery on a transport and sending it to French Indochina. The first Indo-Pakistan War started. India attacked Pakistan. Didn't go well for India. They lost a unit to no Pakistani losses. The CCP, it's kind of hard to see because it's kind of a jumbled mess right now, but CCP moved into this territory here, took it, and then they tried to attack this mass of KMT troops here, but were repulsed. The United States continuing to build up its Pacific Fleet, put out a fleet carrier and some planes. And then the rebellion in French Indochina is continuing to go poorly for France. It lost 2 territories here and here. They only got 2 territories left. Forced France to dump pretty much all of their production into colonial troops into Cambodia last turn. But that's about it for the turn. They're all going to be pretty quick until the actual Korean War starts. Then it'll start getting heavy. But Middle East, or the Arab states, moving their stuff to the Israeli border, because this turn the first Arab-Israeli war begins. And that is also a victory point for the NATO alliance and Warsaw Pact. Same with the Chinese Civil War and the French Indochina Rebellion. All 3 of those are victory points for NATO or Warsaw. So, very important conflicts. Unlike the Greek Civil War, which isn't a victory point. It's just which side's going to control Greece at the end, and Yugoslavia potentially splitting off. Other than that, we'll do the next turn and come back with a recap. Bye. Oh, and the Americans, they do have a CIA agent in Leningrad as well, so the espionage is getting more intense. So, see you then. Alright, we're at the fall of 1948, and the Soviets added a KGB cell in Chicago, continuing to influence Cuba. Likewise, the United States continuing to influence Latin America. The United States actually didn't do so well in the espionage realm this turn. They lost both espionage roles this turn. And then Soviets gaining their first influence point in South Africa. The Greek Civil War was quiet this turn. Soviets contributed a militia. England and the United States didn't contribute anything, and they didn't attack this turn. This is the first round of the first Arab-Israeli War, and it was a slugfest. The Israelis lost about half their total military, and the Arab states lost almost their entire military. It was pretty wild. Like, both sides had damn near perfect rolls. Like, both sides, everything hit with the exception of like 2 units. So that was bloody. Let's see, the first Indo-Pakistan War continues. This round went pretty good for India. They took 2 units out for the price of only 1 of theirs. The Chinese Civil War, it continues stalemate. The CCP hit this KMT Central Province again, or unable to take, or driven out again. CCP just doesn't have enough mass right now to drive that out. Maybe next turn or 2, maybe they'll gain enough mass to drive that out. But and then the French Indochina Rebellion did not go very well for the rebels. They hit the French colonial troops here and here, and they got smacked pretty good. So forced to withdrawal. And that's about it. We got two political events happen this turn. The first being the first Berlin crisis. So if the Soviets decide to trigger that event, go down that event, it will basically lead to the Berlin airlift. So the Soviets have to move 3 infantry into Berlin, which will effectively blockade Berlin. So West Germany will lose the production of West Berlin. And then the United States has to purchase supply equal to the production of West Berlin, and then using air transports fly it in. And they have to maintain that until it ends. So, you can see the United States is set up to do just that. It has two air transports sitting in West Germany. One transport can hold two supply. So if the Soviets do decide to go ahead with that, America is prepared to answer. And then the other thing is the Soviets can start their nuclear weapons program. So they can start building the required facilities to gain nuclear weapons. Because right now, the United States is the only one with nuclear weapons. But starting this turn, the Soviets can start building the facilities to gain nuclear weapons and take away that advantage from the United States and NATO as a whole. So we'll continue with the turn and come back with another update. Alright, we're at the spring of 1949. And I forgot to change over the influence roles, but Soviets and the United States continued to influence Cuba, Latin America, respectively. See, the Soviets did opt to trigger their first Berlin crisis, so they moved their 3 infantry into Berlin and have started blockading it. Likewise, the United States has started the Berlin airlift, flying in supplies to keep the city from starving and freezing and all the other requirements for general human existence. Both the Soviets and the United States have fully infiltrated each other with agents, KGBs. Got 3 agents in the United States. Likewise, the United States has 3 CIA agents in the Soviet Union, spying on each other. The influence roll for South Africa came out as a tie this turn. The Greek Civil War continues. Monarchist Greeks attacked the communist Greeks. It was a 1-for-1 trade and losses. The First Arab-Israeli War is over, ending with an Israeli victory, and that is one of the proxy wars. It is a victory point for whichever side. So Israel won, so that is a victory for NATO. So NATO has drawn first victory. There's 9 total victory points, 9 proxy wars. You need 5 to win the Cold War. So NATO has drawn first blood. The first Indo-Pakistan War continues. It was India attacked and Pakistan lost 1 unit and India lost either 1 unit or 2. Don't exactly remember. The Chinese Civil War, the CCP finally broke through and took this central province from KMT, so that opens up the front for the CCP to make wider attacks. As long as the KMT held that central province, CCP couldn't advance on other fronts. So now that that has been taken, that opens a door for the CCP to attack on multiple axes. And the rebellion in French Indochina continues. The rebels tried to hit the French troops here and Battambag. They managed to take killed 2 French colonial troops for the loss of one of theirs. The rebels aren't necessarily trying to drive the French, completely annihilate the French necessarily. They actually want to keep the French in the fight, drag the war out as long as possible, because that keeps France spending money here and not preparing for when Algeria rebels, because France will be able to much quicker and much easier reinforce Algeria than it can French Indochina, which is way over here. So these attacks that the rebels are making are more to just bleed the French forces so they don't get too strong, build up too much. And then probably at some point the rebels are just going to go strictly on the defensive and just run out the clock, play for time. Probably when this French artillery gets French Indochina, gives the French a real offensive capability. That's probably when the rebels are probably going to go primarily defensive, but we'll see. So the only new political event is the first Arab-Israeli war is over. All the other events / wars are still ongoing. So we'll come back with the next turn update. See you then. Alright, we're at the fall of 49. And Soviets have successfully influenced Cuba, so Cuba is now Soviet aligned. Likewise, the United States has successfully influenced Latin America, so Latin America is NATO aligned. The United States sent a CIA agent up to New York and found the KGB agent there and eliminated him. And the Soviets won the influence role for South Africa this round, so they're tied 2-2. One thing I forgot to mention last round is the Soviets have started constructing the facilities for nuclear weapons, so that will be online sooner rather than later. Let's see. Greek monarchs attacked the communist Greeks. Took out 2 units for only 1 loss of their own. The Berlin airlift, I forgot to clean that up, but the Berlin airlift is over, or the first Berlin crisis is over. The United States' Berlin airlift was successful. They successfully delivered all the supplies to Berlin. So the Soviets will have to pull their forces back from Berlin. The United States will be able to station troops in West Berlin. And U.S. production goes up by 2, and Soviet bloc production goes down by 2. The first Indo-Pakistan War is over. Ended in a draw. The Chinese Civil War, CCP made an attack on the west side, but it was repelled. And then in French Indochina, the rebels took this northern territory from the French, so this is the only remaining French territory. The French landed the artillery forces, and the French tried to counterattack to try to retake the territory, but were driven back. And then the United States moved its Pacific Fleet off the coast. Well, it's also America's only fleet at the moment. But moved its fleet off the coast of Korea, showing that when the Korean War starts, showing that there's a very strong possibility that the United States will intervene. And you can see they put down 2 transports to move troops across the Pacific if they do indeed decide to intervene. That's about it. Like I said, the local event for this turn is the Indo-Pakistan War is over. Jet fighters are unlocked for the Arab states and Israel, so they can start producing jet fighters now. So yeah, that's it. We'll come back with the next turn update. See you then. Welcome everybody. It is the spring of 1950. And the Greek Civil War is over. Ended in a monarchist Greek victory, so the NATO has successfully pushed the communists out of Greece. And in Soviet Union, KGB successfully found the CIA agent in Stalingrad and killed him. Likewise, the CIA agent in Chicago failed to find the KGB agent in Chicago. See, and then the new battleground for the respective intelligence agencies in terms of swaying one nation one way or the other is Libya, and Soviets won the first round. And down in South Africa, NATO won this round, so it's sitting at 3-2. And then with jet fighters being unlocked for the Arab states and Israel, both the Arab states and Israel start construction on airfields. The Arab states started building one in Egypt and the other one in Iraq. And then Israel is building an airfield as well, because for jet fighters they have to operate out of a territory with an airfield. Propeller-driven planes don't. And then the Chinese Civil War is over. The CCP have won, so the KMT are no more. That's a proxy war, so that is a victory point. So the Cold War is tied. 1 point NATO and 1 point Warsaw. So Cold War is tied at the moment. And then the United States took its 2 transports, loaded up all of its Marines, and moved them to Japan. because the Korean War starts next turn, so the United States is showing that it's going to intervene. And then put down 2 more transports. England started construction on an escort carrier. The French tried to break out of the single territory again, but were unable to, had to withdraw. So France is continuing to be bottled up in this one remaining territory. And that's pretty much it for the turn. The political events for this turn is that the Chinese Civil War and the Greek Civil War come to a close. Now the only war at the moment is the rebellion going on in French Indochina. But that's short-lived because, like I said, the Korean War starts next turn. So, and that will be another proxy war. So that'll be another victory point on the line. So the rebellion in French Indochina, and then that's a victory point on the line, and then next turn when the Korean War starts, that will be another victory point on the line. So those are important conflicts that both sides need to win. So we'll come back with the next turn. See you then. The fall of 1950 now. Not much happened last turn because the only war going on last turn is the rebellion in French Indochina. But United States continuing to build up, moving its air transports back to the U.S. Probably send them to the West Coast to start ferrying troops over to Asia, because all of America's potential conflicts in the Phase 1 of Cold War are in Asia. Argentina building up its forces. The Arab states rebuilding its military that was decimated in the first Arab-Israeli War. Rest of Europe just building up. South Africa is tied 3 points to 3 points. Soviets have the lead in Libya. SAC put out its first tank. Communist China started building an airfield, and on the border of North Korea, and started moving its army to the North Korean border. So China is hinting at that they might intervene once the Korean War starts as well. The United States moving more and more of its forces over to Asia. French tried to break out of the pocket again, were forced to withdraw. And that's about it for the turn. Like I said, not much happened. So the new things for this turn is the Korean War begins this turn. So we'll see whether or not the United States and Communist China decide to intervene or not. But Korean War is definitely happening. And then Spetsnaz unlocks for the Soviets their elite infantry. And that's about it. Short turn, not much happened. It's Scoreboard's tied 1 apiece, 1 point for NATO, 1 point for Warsaw. So we will get to the turn and see what happens with Korea. Hello, and we're at the spring of 1951, and the United States did choose to intervene in Korea, and one of the rules is if a nation is at war, it can't donate to its faction fund. So the United States was responsible for the vast majority of NATO funding. So with that gone, NATO resources are going to be curtailed pretty substantially, but that also allows America to start beefing up its forces a lot faster. So in that spirit, the United States has begun its Atlantic fleet, down 2 destroyers, a submarine, and a transport, and then started on another fleet carrier and a cruiser. The Soviets have won again in Libya, so they're now up 2-0 on the United States. But the United States won down in South Africa, so they're up 4-3. The Soviets have their first nuclear weapons. So Russia has joined, the Soviets have joined the nuclear club. Kind of in response to that, the United States has developed another nuclear weapon. So the nuclear arms race has now begun. Other than that, everyone else just continuing to build up. England concentrated on its navy, put down an escort carrier, and then everyone else just continuing to build up. China had finished construction on its airfield and has started construction of a major factory. I said France tried to break out from its pocket again, was repulsed again. And I said last section that the Korean War has started. Well, it's not going too well for the North Koreans. After their initial push, the South Koreans counterattacked. And, well, you can see the results there. That is all that's left of the North Korean army. The United States, like I said, the United States chose to intervene and made landfall in Busan. So without Chinese intervention, it's not going to be good for North Korea. But last 2 turns, China has been massing its army on the Korean border, so they haven't officially declared whether or not they're going to intervene. They have to this turn declare, but considering that they're massing on the Korean border and the entire Chinese military is heading that direction, it's a pretty safe bet that China is going to intervene as well. And escalate this war pretty significantly. It'll be the United States and South Korea versus North Korea and China. I'm pretty sure I said earlier this is a victory point, but also beyond that, this is an event that could trigger World War III early. There's 3 points where World War III can be triggered. The Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then its quote-unquote regular start date of 2050. But how World War III can be triggered with the Korean conflict is and it has to be triggered by the United States. If the United States makes a ground attack in any Chinese territory, or if the United States makes an air attack outside of Julin here. The United States can make air attacks in this province, so it can take its strategic bombers and do carpet bombing raids, and it can send fighters in there to escort them. But if the United States uses air power in any Chinese territory outside of there, it'll cause World War III. And if the United States uses any ground force in any Chinese territory at all, it will cause World War III. Also, if the United States uses nukes anywhere, if the United States uses nukes in North Korea or China, that will also cause World War III to begin. So, as long as the United States keeps it limited to the Korean Peninsula, more or less, it will not trigger World War III. And I may be asking, why on earth would the United States deliberately cause World War III? Well, it depends on how the Cold War is going up to this point. Right now it's tied 1-1. It's first 1 to 5 points wins the Cold War, and if the Soviets win the Cold War, then the Soviet Union gets to keep all of Eastern Europe. And so that production that it will keep accumulated over multiple turns will make the Soviet Union very strong come 2050. So right now it's tied 1-1, so not really much of a urge, because to start World War III, because it's 1-1. But say if the Arab states had won the first Arab-Israeli war and destroyed Israel, then the Warsaw Pact would have 3 victory points, and then they won the Chinese Civil War, so they'd have 4 victory points right now, and they'd only need 1 more, and they'd win the Cold War. And considering how France is doing in French Indochina, that might be in NATO's best interest to start World War III now, before the Soviet Union has 30 turns to just build this massive freaking army. So that's why NATO might consider starting World War III early. Pretty much in all instances, it's the NATO alliance who decide if they want to start World War III early, because it'll always benefit the Warsaw Pact to start World War III early. It'll always benefit them. So we leave it in NATO's hands on whether or not to start it early. But so that's the other big consideration of the Korean War. Is this is the first instance where World War III can start. But with that, we will pursue the Korean conflict and come back later. Alright, we are now at the spring of 1954, and the United States, we'll just start left and go right. Israel and the Arab states, they've been at peace, so they've just been spending the time building up their forces. Same thing with Europe, England, Germany, Russia. They've just been building up their stuff. England did move their SAS operas down into NATO-aligned Turkey. And with the United States at war in Korea, they, when a nation's officially at war, they cannot contribute to their faction fund. So America being able to keep all of its 54 IPCs, that's allowed America to build up pretty substantially its overall military compared to what it was when it went into Korea. Same thing, Argentina just continuing to build up. Down in Africa, the Soviets have successfully aligned South Africa. Libya is still being contested. The United States made a comeback. It was sitting at 1-3 in terms of the influence, but it's clawed its way back to tie it. But with South Africa solidly in the Soviet park now, they've moved on to Madagascar, try to influence that. The United States has gotten the first point. CIA and KGB are going at it in their respective cities. It's been a pretty bloody affair on both ends of the aisle. They've lost a lot of agents to each other so far. And then here was the other half, the U.S. buildup of forces. And here is Vietnam, or French Indochina. The French finally were able to break out, take another territory. Problem is there's only one turn left in the war, so the victory points are Saigon, Hue, Hanoi, and Dien Bien. So France has pretty much lost that war. Now here's Korea. The Korean conflict is over. It has ended in a NATO victory. It was pretty substantial back and forth when the war started. The South Koreans and the Americans pushed the North Koreans all the way to the Chinese border. And then China entered the war and intervened and pushed the United States and South Korea all the way back to the original border, where then it kind of stalemated for the last couple turns. So followed history pretty closely in that. The only different when China entered and the North Koreans and Chinese pushed South Korea and the U.S. back to original border, they did take Seoul. It was very temporary. It was the North Koreans took Seoul, and then the South Koreans, who go right after North Korea, counterattacked and took it right back. So it wasn't very long, but but yeah. So the Korean War is over, ended in a NATO victory. So score is now 2-1. Pretty much first 1 to 5 wins the Cold War. The other, so other than the Korean War ending, the other event for this turn is the first round of upgrades begins. These F-86 Sabres will turn into F-4 Phantoms, and these A-1 Sky Raiders will turn into Thunder Chiefs, and so on and so forth. The American main battle tanks will turn into M60 Pattons, and so on and so forth down the line. So that is a mechanic of this, is you have to keep up with the upgrades. If you don't upgrade and you fall behind, then bad things will happen when you actually have to fight. All the militia gets removed, because it's a balancing mechanic during the upgrade cycles. Militia gets removed. So otherwise, you'll have nations with super stacks of 20 militia. But other than that, that was the turn. I'll come back next turn with the resolution of the French Indochina Rebellion, even though we pretty much know the outcome already. But we'll see you then. Alright, we're at the fall of 1954 turn. And this is the first round of upgrades, or the first turn of the upgrade cycle, so pretty much everyone's just replacing the old tech. So British put out the next generation tactical bomber. Germans the next generation of their fighter. Same thing with Israel, put out the next generation of their tactical bomber. Soviets put out their new heavy bomber, the Tupolev Tu something. The French Indochina Rebellion is over, ended in a Warsaw Pact victory. The French were defeated. But the new war is Algeria is rebelling against France, so that's the new proxy war going on. France, anticipating the start of that, pre-positioned some colonial infantry to fight it, or at least to keep the rebels from just taking it unopposed. And then the United States withdrawing all of its stuff back to the home country, so to upgrade everything. As you can see, everyone has pulled out of Korea. China's pulled out, and the United States has begun the process of withdrawing its forces, because Korea's over. The United States has started building up the infrastructure on Guam, probably to use Guam as a forward base for when Vietnam starts. So the United States is building an airfield there. And China started construction of an airfield as well because its only other airfield is way up here in the north, so started building another airfield down here so they could have air coverage in the southern half of China. And that's about it. So this is what French Indochina looks like at the end of the rebellion. Like I said, France lost, so this will become Cambodia, this will become Laos, this will become North Vietnam, and South Vietnam. The United States and the Soviets both increased their nuclear weapon stockpiles. So Russia now has 2, the United States has 3. The Cold War is tied at 2-2, with the French defeat in French Indochina. It gave the Warsaw Pact a victory point, so it's tied up at 2-2. And that was it for the turn. So the French Indochina War is over, but the Algerian War begins this turn. So France ends one war only to immediately go into another one. So we'll come back with next turn update. Alright, we have the spring of 1955. And the United States and Europe, they're just continuing their upgrades, so really not much to go over there. The only conflict on the globe at the time is the Algerian rebellion against France. The rebels did come down and took southern Algeria, so now the only thing that France still has is Tunis. And France is recalling its artillery from Vietnam to come take part in that. And then China finished its air base, and so did the United States. So the United States can start stationing air power on Guam. Like I said, projected to use Guam as a FOB, a forward operating base for future Vietnam conflict when that starts, and assuming America chooses to intervene. Speaking of Vietnam, war hasn't started yet, but various factions are starting to build up. Yellow being South Vietnam, white is going to be the future Viet Cong, and Russia, the Russian pieces being North Vietnam, with these little things being their respective capitals, Saigon and Hanoi. The Viet Cong are funded by the Warsaw Pact. And we'll dive more. The Viet Cong have some special rules to them. We'll dive into that once the Vietnam War actually starts. When it starts, it's more of a South Vietnamese civil war. North Vietnam's not directly involved yet. It's just the Viet Cong. So it's more of a civil war in South Vietnam. Of course, then later on, America can intervene, and if America does intervene, that changes the dynamics of the war completely in terms of Cambodia and Laos. But the United States continuing to withdraw from Korea back to the states to continue its upgrade progress. But the main event for this turn is the Russian space program begins. The start of the Russian space program was kind of a cluster of kind of a clusterfuck of competing factions, companies, and interests. So for the first couple turns, Soviets have to make dice rolls to see which group gets the contract to start the Russian space program, and it's centered in the Russia's three cities: Leningrad, Smolensk, and Stalingrad. And Soviets roll 3 dice. The lowest value of the 3 dice gets eliminated till it's down to just one city, and then it has to start building the Baikonur space facility in Kazakhstan, and then they can start the space race. So this is the start of the space race between the United States and the Soviets. The United States is a little bit behind on it. They still have to wait a couple more turns before they can start NASA. The United States, the start of its space program was much more organized and efficient historically. So the United States doesn't have to do the competing cities. It just gets to immediately start building its launch center, the Kennedy Launch Center in Florida. But that's several turns down the road. So for right now, it's just the Soviets as they try to figure out who the hell is going to be in charge of their space program. So we'll come back with the next update. Alright, well, at the fall of 1955, not a whole lot going on, because there are kind of in-between major wars. Smolensk lost the bid for the Soviet space program, so now it's between Leningrad and Stalingrad. And the Soviets won again in Libya, so they just need one more to gain the influence in Libya. The Algerian rebels attacked the French in Tunis, and it was a total disaster for the rebels. They lost 2 units to France's 0. And that was pretty much the fighting for the turn. Everyone else is just replacing their old tech with the new stuff. The British moved their fleet to the Mediterranean off the Israeli coast. But other than that, everyone's just upgrading their stuff. Vietnam is still building up, preparing for when that kicks off. The United States is still evacuating Korea. But speaking of Vietnam, the Vietnam War has started, or at least the South Vietnamese Civil War portion of it. So it'll be at least for now, it'll be the South Vietnamese forces, that's the yellow, versus the Viet Cong, more or less rebels, in the white. But that's about it for the turn. So we'll come back next turn with an update then. See you then. Alright, now we're at the spring of 1956. And the only action going on is Algeria and Vietnam. Everyone else just continuing to upgrade their stuff. But the Algerian rebels attacked the French in Tunis again. About even losses on both sides. Leningrad won the bid for the Soviet space program. So the Leningrad territory will be funding the Soviet space program, and Soviets will then be able to start constructing the Baikonur facility in Kazakhstan next turn. And then North Korea, South Korea, and North Vietnam are all have begun construction of airfields. And then Vietnam, the Viet Cong attacked the South Vietnamese forces here in Dak Lak and wiped it out. Then the South Vietnamese forces from out of Saigon counterattacked. Viet Cong, one of their special abilities is they can retreat when defending. They got a hit on the South Vietnamese forces, also known as ARVN, and then opted to retreat. So, pretty good turn for the Viet Cong. Pretty poor one for ARVN, but so that was the first turn of the Vietnam War. And that was pretty much it for the turn. The new thing for this turn, like I said, is the Soviets will be able to start building the Baikonur facility in Kazakhstan. And that's about it. So we'll come back with an update from the next turn. Alright, we're at the fall of 1956, and got a little bit more to talk about this time around. One of the things I forgot to mention last video is the United States can turn these C-47s into gunships, the AC-47. So they'll be able to hit ground targets at a 6 or less and have target selection, so that'll be a very powerful unit. Taking its place for the air transport role in the propeller-driven is the AC-130. Now, though the United States will basically have two different types of air transport. It'll be the propeller-driven, provided by the C-130, and then there'll be the jet engine-driven, provided by the C-17, which I don't have on the board right now because I haven't built them yet. But the difference between a propeller-driven and the jet-driven is one carrying capacity. This can carry one infantry or one artillery, whereas the and can land anywhere. Doesn't need an air base. Whereas the jet engine-driven air transport, it can carry two infantry class units or one any other type of ground unit, but can only land in a territory that has an air base. So bigger carrying capacity, but limited to where it can go. So we'll go over to Europe. You can see America is beefing up its presence in Europe. And then England has moved its force, loaded up 3 transports, loaded up a good chunk of its army, and came down to the Mediterranean. France has completed its aircraft carrier, so France has joined the carrier club. And then you'll notice the Eastern Bloc forces have moved out of Hungary into Ukraine, and there is a not Soviet bloc infantry in Hungary. That's because Hungary has now revolted, and so the Eastern Bloc will be responsible for putting that down if they so choose. I don't see why they would, because Eastern Bloc's not getting that production while it's revolting, so allowed to put that down. And then this turn, the Second Arab-Israeli War begins, so Israel and the Arab states will go to war again. England and France can intervene if they so choose, but considering England has parked its entire fleet off the Israeli coast and moved a large chunk of its army down to the Mediterranean and landed British SAS in Israel, it's a pretty safe bet that England is going to be intervening. The Algerian rebels took another crack at the French, the French colonial infantry. Algerian rebels lost 2 infantry to France's 1, so they withdrew. They need to conserve their troop strength for when France starts bringing substantial firepower to the battlefield. Soviets have started construction of the Baikonur launch facility in Kazakhstan. The United States moved one of its fleets down to the South China Sea to beef up their presence there. The United States continuing to evacuate its forces from Korea. It's almost done. And in Vietnam, the Viet Cong attacked ARVN forces here, they attacked ARVN forces here in Dong Lac, whittled them down to 1 infantry and then decided to withdraw. Then ARVN attacked the Viet Cong. No hits were scored on either side, but the Viet Cong opted to retreat nonetheless. So ARVN is continuing to have difficulties fighting and containing the Viet Cong. North Vietnamese forces continue to build up. They completed an airfield, air base, so their Soviet-supplied MiGs will be able to take off and make life difficult for NATO. And that was, Soviets successfully influenced Libya, so NATO's kind of getting crushed in the whole espionage department. Soviets have influenced South Africa and now Libya, and they're leading in Madagascar, so NATO is getting crushed in the espionage sector. So hopefully they'll be able to turn that around, depending on what side of the fence you're on. But that was the turn. Like I said, so the new events for this turn is Second Arab-Israeli War begins, and the victory objective is the Sinai. So Israel has to attack and take the Sinai. The Arab states have to hold it. That'll be the deciding factor of the war. And that is the victory point for the Cold War. So, very important. And then Hungary is revolting. So we'll come back in a couple turns with another update. See where the Cold War is at. See you then. Alright, we're at the fall of 1958. And the Hungarian revolt has been crushed. The Eastern Bloc forces retook Hungary, crushed it. And then the Second Arab-Israeli War has ended in an Israeli victory. So that gives NATO alliance a 3rd point. So it's now 3-2, and Israel Israel defeated the Arab states in the Sinai and took it, and then with British and French reinforcements were able to hold against the Arab state counterattack from Jordan and Syria. Although it was very costly for both Israel and the Arab states. Israel lost probably somewhere around half to 50 to 60% of its total military. The Arab states lost probably around 80% of their total military. So it was costly. The United States continuing to beef up its presence in Europe. Moved its new B-52 bombers to Europe, and moved a mid-air refueler to Sardinia. And that plane should be over here in West Germany. Other than that, Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc nations continuing to upgrade their military. Still haven't fully upgraded it yet. Over in Africa, NATO is making a really strong comeback in terms of the espionage. They got 3-0 in Nigeria, but they are losing in Madagascar 5-3. So Soviets just got to get one more point, and they'll take Madagascar, and that'll be 3 territories in a row that the Soviets have taken in Africa. So not looking too good, but NATO is winning in Nigeria, so hopefully they get it. The Soviets have completed the Baikonur launch facility in Kazakhstan, so they have started their end of the space race. The United States is now able to start their Kennedy Launch Center in Florida. So the United States has some catching up to do in the space race department. China is fully completed their modernization of their military and is starting to move their military down to the North Vietnamese border. And then the United States has pretty much turned Guam into pretty much the biggest air base in the world. This is all stuff that's in Guam, and it's pretty much nothing but air power. And then speaking of Vietnam, South Vietnam Civil War is more or less stalemated. The Viet Cong will wipe out an ARVN territories, but then the ARVN will counterattack, and they haven't been able to completely wipe out a Viet Cong unit because they can withdraw during combat, but they've inflicted some pretty substantial losses. The Viet Cong are able to take advantage of the North Vietnamese hospital, so they're using the Ho Chi Minh Trail once they come back from the hospital. The Viet Cong are using the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and then eastern Cambodia to re-enter South Vietnam and do nefarious things. The United States completed its large air transport fleet. And that's about it. So the Cold War events for this turn, there's 2 of them. First one being the United States can begin its space program to get involved in the space race. And then the other one is the Second Berlin Crisis. It's a little bit of a repeat of the First Berlin Crisis. Basically, Berlin is still split in half. West Berlin is under NATO occupation / management, and East Berlin's under Soviet. And after about 10 years of development, West Berlin, under the capitalist West and NATO nations, is a thriving metropolis and doing very well for itself, while the Eastern Berlin, under communist rule, is still a still a shithole. So the Soviets were losing massive amounts of people crossing over into West Berlin to escape Soviet occupation and live in capitalist West. And so it's kind of a stain on the Soviet image, because they're getting their asses kicked on the economic scale and the immigration factor. So kind of a repeat of what they did back in the 40s with the Berlin airlift. The Soviets tried to pressure the United States to withdraw from West Berlin and allow the Soviets to just occupy all of Berlin. The United States' new president, John F. Kennedy, had to deal with it in the Soviet leadership. Because Kennedy was new to the presidency, he thought he could try to bully Kennedy into backing down, and Kennedy more or less told Soviets that they can shove it where the sun don't shine, and basically triggers the Second Berlin Crisis. It's a multi-stage event, so I'll explain it stage by stage. So I won't go too in depth with it right now, but the next video will be the first stage of the Second Berlin Crisis, and I'll explain greater detail then. So until then, we'll see you later. Alright, we're at the spring of 1959, and the Soviets have triggered the Second Berlin Crisis. The Soviets took 2 infantry, moved it into Berlin, and demand that NATO pull out of Berlin completely. And the United States decided it will not give in to the Soviet demands and moved an infantry and a tank into Berlin to as a show of force. So now it's back in the Soviet camp if they want to back down or continue contesting this. So tensions in Berlin are very high at the moment, because we got 2 Soviet infantry and 2 American infantry and a tank staring down their sights at each other. Like I said, it's in the Soviet camp now whether or not they want to back down or continue escalating this. The United States has begun construction of the Kennedy Space Center so they can join the space race against Russia. Things continue to go well for NATO and Nigeria. They've won 4 influence roles in a row. And then in Madagascar, they're making a comeback. They've They've won the last 2 or 3 to almost catch up with the Soviets. The Soviets had 5, so they only needed 1 more to win Madagascar, and NATO was like 3 points behind or something like that, so they've closed it to within 1, but the Soviets only need 1 more point and they'll win Madagascar, so NATO would have to win the next 2 in order to get Madagascar. In Algeria, the Algerian rebellion, France has been concentrating its efforts in southern Algeria. Northern Algeria is stronger in troop concentration and it's mountainous, so it's it would be much harder to take. So France is concentrating on southern Algeria first. They've been able to inflict pretty much equal losses or taking down as many Algerian rebels as France is losing themselves. But France has been gradually increasing its firepower. Now they now have 2 tanks and 2 mechanized infantry, as well as a tactical bomber that's on the carrier. So hopefully they'll be able to start making some progress. And then in Vietnam, this turn was a complete disaster for the Viet Cong. ARVN made 2 attacks and just absolutely hammered the Viet Cong. They almost completely wiped out the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. The only exception is this 1 Viet Cong infantry, so that was a major blow against the Viet Cong and a big win for ARVN. Fortunately for the Viet Cong, most of their infantry was taken as wounded, not killed. So the Viet Cong are going to be able to get a good portion of that infantry back. But the Viet Cong did lose all their artillery. So it's going to be quite a while for the Viet Cong to rebuild that. And new event for this turn is the Cold War tensions continue to rise, but this time in America's backyard. The tensions between Cuba and the United States have begun to rise, and so Cuba is now eligible to receive Warsaw Pact funds and can start building up its forces. And if they do that, in response to that, Latin America can start building up its forces for a potential future conflict between Cuba and the United States. And that can have very drastic consequences for the Cold War up to and including starting World War III. So the Cold War is heating up substantially between the Berlin crisis and now the rising tensions in Cuba. This has the potential of going very hot. So we'll do a couple turns and come back with another update. Alright, we're at the spring of 1961. Fighting a bit of a cold here, so forgive me if I cough and hack during this. I think the only one still in the upgrade process is the Soviet Union, I think. The Eastern Bloc, I think they're fully upgraded. So it's just the Soviet Union that's the only one still upgrading, but the Berlin crisis, second Berlin crisis, is still ongoing. The American and Soviet forces in Berlin are still in a standoff with each other. The negotiations are proceeding. I believe the Americans are winning. I believe. But we'll see how that turns out. Tensions in Cuba have hit a breaking point. This turn, the United States can lead the Central American forces to invade Cuba. The United States has to provide the transport, and it can provide a medium bomber if it wants to. It has chosen to do so. Likelihood of that succeeding is very slim, but so this turn, that battle can happen. The Bay of Pigs invasion. England has finished its nuclear reactor and heavy water plant. Now all it's waiting on is the uranium mine in Canada, and England will have unlocked nuclear weapons. The Algerian rebellion. The French have been able to take southern Algeria, but northern Algeria, that's a different issue. It's much more rebels in the mountains, and the mountains themselves give a pretty substantial defensive bonus. It is hard to beat, at least for the French at this point in time. But so a little bit of progress for the French, but cracking that rebel mountain stronghold will be tough, and they only have a handful of turns left to do it, so it's not looking good for them. NATO managed to steal Madagascar out from under the Soviets. NATO was down by like 4 points, and the Soviets just needed one more point to take Madagascar, but NATO managed to win like 4 straight rolls and stole Madagascar out from the Soviets, so that was very unexpected. Soviets having a bit of a comeback in Nigeria. NATO was up 4-0, but Soviets have won the last 2. So Soviets have had a bit of a comeback in Nigeria. The United States has finished the Kennedy Launch Center, so the United States has fully joined the space race with the Soviets. And the only other news is Vietnam. Last couple turns have been about absolutely abysmal for the Viet Cong. The ARVN are definitely dominating the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, so without direct North Vietnamese intervention, it's not looking good for the Viet Cong. Still several turns away from North Vietnam being able to directly intervene, but the United States continuing to build up its forces in Guam. It's landed substantial ground units in the last couple turns. So Guam is turning into an island fortress. Excuse me, for the Americans. And that's about it. Australia finished Anzac finished its nuclear reactor in Sydney. So Anzac, or Australia, is starting its nuclear program as well. China continuing to move its stuff down to the Vietnam border. In case the United States, if the United States intervenes in Vietnam, it can choose to do a limited intervention where it restricts itself to strictly South Vietnam. Later on, it will be able to open its theater of operations into Cambodia if it wants, but America intervenes at any time if the United States uses ground troops in North Vietnam. That will open the door for China to intervene as well if it so chooses. So China's been moving its army down to the Vietnam border in case that does happen. But that's about it. Like I said earlier, the political event for this turn is the Bay of Pigs. The American-backed Central American forces can invade Cuba to try to overthrow Castro. Almost zero chance of it happening because Cuba's got 4 infantry and 4 militia. The only forces that the United States was able to raise is two Marine infantry. So it's two Marine infantry and a medium bomber versus 4 infantry and 4 militia. So highly unlikely that's going to succeed, but that's kind of not the point. It opens the door for another event to happen about a year later. So we'll get to the turn and come back with an update on pretty much how the Bay of Pigs invasion went. See you then. Alright, it's the fall of 1961. And the Bay of Pigs invasion happened, and a total disaster for NATO. The Latin American forces were completely wiped out, as well as the medium bomber the U.S. supplied. And all it managed to do was kill 1 militia. So, total disaster. The U.S. brought its transport back up to the East Coast. And then and everyone else just built up. France made an attack northern Algeria. Took out 3 Algerian rebels for the loss of 6 of their own. In Vietnam, Arvin made 2 attacks on the Viet Cong. Managed to do some damage, and the remnants fled. And then the political event for this turn was the Second Berlin Crisis has concluded. The negotiations have failed. Either the United States nor the Soviets can come to agreement. So, in response, the Soviets have built the Berlin Wall, completely closing off East Berlin. So the Eastern Bloc production goes up by 1, the West German production goes down by 1. And that's it for the turn. Russia completed its missile silo, so it can launch nuclear missiles from there. They have a range of 4. You can also launch them from submarines as well, so because the Bay of Pigs happened, the Cuban Missile Crisis can now happen, so that means this is which is next turn. So what that means is this is another opportunity where World War III can start right now. So the Soviets are preparing everything, so if World War III does start and it wants to use a nuclear option, NATO assets are in range. But that was it for the turn, so we'll do the next turn and come back with an update. Excuse me. Alright, it's spring of 1962, and the French made another attack to northern Algeria, and it was bad. The Algerian rebels lost 3 units to France's 7 or 8. So that means that France has effectively... There's still one more turn in the war, but that means France has effectively lost the war. And means Warsaw Pact will be getting... well, next turn, Warsaw Pact will be getting another victory point, so that will tie it up at 3-3. NATO continuing to dominate Nigeria, got another point, so it's now 5-2. So NATO just needs one more point and it will secure Nigeria. Mozambique, Soviets lead by 1 point, but they've managed to tie the last 3 rolls or so. One thing I forgot to mention last section was China has now started to build its navy. It's got two destroyers and a cruiser under construction. And then in Vietnam, the woes for the Viet Cong continue. ARVN managed to completely wipe out this Viet Cong force here, and then this Viet Cong force was reduced to just an infantry and artillery before fleeing. So it is very much going to require North Vietnamese intervention to salvage the situation, which is a double-edged sword, because that will guaranteed bring the United States into the conflict. And that is a much tougher enemy for North Vietnam to fight. China is continuing to mass its army on the border in case if America intervenes and then attacks North Vietnam with ground troops, that will greenlight China to be able to intervene. So China is massing on the Vietnam border in case that does happen. Anzac has completed its nuclear reactor and is now moving on to heavy water plant, so it can join the nuclear club. Speaking of nuclear club, England has completed all the facilities and produced their first nuke, so England has joined the nuclear club. So, good for them. So, the political event for this turn is the Cuban Missile Crisis can be activated, because the Soviets influenced Cuba, and then the United States influenced Latin America, and then because the United States led the Latin American attack on Cuba in the Bay of Pigs, which utterly failed, that means that if the Soviets so choose, they can take this transport with this missile battery, land it on Cuba, and that will trigger that will trigger the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, if that happens, the United States has to fly getting over a cold here, so bear with me. The United States has to fly a tactical bomber over Cuba. It doesn't cause combat, but has to make a die roll to find the missile batteries. If it successfully finds the missile battery, and they have 2 turns to do it, the United States has 3 options. It can invade Cuba, full-on invade Cuba, which will immediately trigger World War III. And a full-scale war, everyone immediately goes to war along their respective alliances. the United States can attempt an airstrike to wipe out the missile batteries. If they are successful, the United States gets a +4 production bonus, while the Eastern Bloc gets a -4 production, and then Cuba reverts back to a neutral, and all those Cuban forces disappear. Excuse me. However, if the airstrike fails, meaning the United States fails to destroy all the missile sites, then the Soviet Union can either show restraint and not declare war, but the production bonus is reversed. The United States suffers the -4 production bonus, while the Eastern Bloc, or while the Soviet Union gets a +4 production bonus. Or Russia can declare war, start in World War III, and it gets one free nuclear strike without the option of retaliation from NATO. So that is one of the big risk, but big reward options. Or the third option is the United States can do what they did historically and implement a blockade on Cuba, move the fleet down to C-Zone 49, implement a blockade, and if they do that, that is a safe option. Cuba reverts to neutral, all those Cuban forces go away, American production goes up by 2, Eastern Bloc production goes down by 2. And then the Soviet Union then has to remove these missile batteries from Cuba. That is a safer option. So, we will see what happens. World War III, good start this turn. The only other thing is Navy SEALs are unlocked for the United States, so the United States can start getting its special forces on the board. So we will get to the turn, and we'll see if World War III starts this turn or not. Alright, we're at the fall of 1962. Excuse me. And I'll have to go over this turn. Starting with the Cuban Missile Crisis has been resolved. The United States opted for the blockade. So World War III does not start this turn. But consequences, the U.S. first successfully detected the missile silos, and then second opted to blockade. They had the required assets for a blockade. Need 3 surface warships, which had two cruisers and 2 destroyers and a cruiser, plus a carrier. So that forced the Soviets to back off, and next this turn the Soviets will have to remove that anti-air battery, and then as a consequence all Cuban forces are removed and Cuba leaves the Warsaw Pact and goes to a strict neutral. So pretty big win for NATO there. U.S. production also goes up by 2. Eastern Bloc production goes down by 2. Influence role in Nigeria tied again. It's like the 5th or 6th time that they've tied on Nigeria. It's getting kind of old. But the United States did win the influence role for Mozambique, so put NATO on the board for Mozambique. bit of bad news for NATO. This is the last turn of the Algerian rebellion, so the Algerian rebels came down from their mountain fortresses and attacked southern Algeria and Tunis and completely wiped out all French forces. Pretty much wiped out the entire French military. The only thing left of the French military is its navy, this escort carrier and a transport. It's a tactical bomber. France decided not to scramble as tactical bomber, seeing the futility of it. It'd just be sending it to its death. So, major blow to France. Like I said, it pretty much lost its entire military, and because that was the last turn, lost the war. And so that's a victory point for Warsaw. So the Cold War is tied up once again at 3 points apiece. 3 points NATO, 3 points Warsaw. Vietnam, continuing to go good for NATO. The Viet Cong are just getting hammered every turn. They're getting very close to being wiped out every turn. You can see there's a lot more yellow in South Vietnam than there is white. So, yeah, it is very much looking that without North Vietnam intervention, Vietnam is toast. Granted, North Vietnam has built up a pretty big army, so when the time comes, it's 4 or 5 turns from now, North Vietnam will have the option of intervening. Definitely has the forces to turn that around. But if North, excuse me, still fighting a cold. North Vietnam intervenes, that will pretty much guarantee that the United States will intervene in kind. And that is a much more serious foe because the United States has numbers and quality. Everything it's got is state of the art and can bring a lot more firepower to the equation between B-52 heavy strategic bombers, AC-47 Dragon gunships, UH-1 Iroquois, also known as Hueys, that can double as either a transport helicopter or an attack helicopter. And then just as Air Force in general, being much more powerful, including its tactical bombers, have a special ability called Wild Weasel, which basically gives them first strike capability against enemy anti-air units. So, not to mention offshore bombardments from its battleship. So, North Vietnam intervenes. That'll pretty much guarantee American intervention, and Vietnam will explode in scale and lethality. So, see what's going on there. The United States is definitely winning the space race. It is at least 20 points ahead of the Soviets in terms of the space race. So, other than Algeria being a total disaster for the French, Cold War is going pretty good for NATO, despite it being tied up at 3 points apiece. So we'll come back in a couple turns with another update. Alright, it is spring of 1965, and NATO has successfully influenced Nigeria, so Nigeria has joined the NATO camp. And then the Mozambique has gone pretty well for NATO. They're up 4-2 on the Soviets. And with Nigeria being decided, the contention point has moved to northern Algeria. NATO draw first to win. Northern Algeria is pretty attractive due to the fact that it has an air base and a naval base. So Warsaw wants that because that will go to the Arab states when World War III starts. NATO wants to keep it out of their hands. So see, this turn, the second Indo-Pakistan War starts, so Pakistan and India are going to be clashing again. Tensions are rising between the Soviets and China. A border skirmish is on the horizon, so Soviets and China have both been beefing up their forces on the border in preparation for that skirmish when it comes about. And then the South Vietnam Civil War has escalated. ARVN and Viet Cong have been continuing to play cat and mouse with each other in South Vietnam. The Viet Cong have been just kind of barely holding on. As you can see, there's a lot more yellow on South Vietnam than there is white. So this turn, now that they're able to, North Vietnam has announced that they will be intervening in the South Vietnamese Civil War. So South Vietnam Civil War has escalated. North Vietnam has entered and gotten involved. In response to that, the United States has the option of conducting an airstrike on North Vietnamese forces to try to persuade them to not intervene. So this turn, and for this turn, that's all the United States can do. So what that means is it can take its B-52 bombers, fly them into North Vietnam, and make carpet bombing runs on this North Vietnamese force. The North Vietnamese can shoot back with their anti-aircraft and can scramble fighters to try to intercept the bombers. So the United States are going to have to devote fighter escorts, and then its tactical bombers have a unique ability that's unlocked called Wild Weasel, which means they can get first strike. If they declare a Wild Weasel mission, they can get, if they get a hit, they'll gain first strike on enemy anti-aircraft units. So this turn, we could see America flying B-52s into North Vietnam with F-4 Phantoms squaring off against MiG-19s, I believe. And then its tactical bombers going after anti-aircraft. So big escalation in Vietnam. And then, of course, North Vietnam can then invade South Vietnam, and it can use the Ho Chi Minh Trail, so it doesn't have to go down this. It can also flank into Laos and then into Cambodia and hit South Vietnam from the west. So it's going to get hairy in Vietnam. The United States is handedly winning the space race. It only needs like 16 or 17 more points to win, whereas the Soviets need 50 or 60. So it looks like the United States is going to beat the Soviets to the moon handedly. But so we'll come back next turn and see what happens with Vietnam. Does it escalate into full-blown war between the United States and North Vietnam, or does it stay limited? And also there is a chance that China can get involved too, but we'll get to that next turn. Alright, we're in the fall of 1965. And pretty much everything happened this turn was in Asia, so not really much to go on with the West and Europe, but NATO and Warsaw are tied in northern Algeria for 1 point apiece. It looks like NATO is going to win Mozambique. Warsaw would have to win the next 4 influence rolls in a row to win it. NATO only needs 1 more and they get it. So the second Indo-Pakistan War went down, and it was quite the bloodbath. India lost 1/3 of its total infantry, so that kind of hurt. And the war is over. So now India is gearing up for the 3rd Indo-Pakistan War. That's a couple of years down the road. Soviets and China continue building up their forces on the border. For the eventual border skirmish. But the main show is in Vietnam. The United States bombed North Vietnam. Managed to kill 2 infantry units and an anti-aircraft for no losses of their own to try to persuade the North Vietnamese to stay out of the South Vietnam Civil War. And as you can see, North Vietnam did not listen. They invaded, took away, and elements of their military are going down the Ho Chi Minh Trail into Laos and Cambodia to invade from the west. So it now means that the United States pretty much has no choice but to get involved in South Vietnam. So otherwise, South Vietnam's toast. The likelihood of them being able to defend and hold out against that massive North Vietnamese army by itself is pretty slim. So this has gone from a South Vietnamese Civil War to just the Vietnam War. Because now it's North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and the United States are involved. China has the vast majority of its army sitting on the border. If the United States attacks North Vietnam with ground forces, that will open the door for China to intervene as well. So as long as the United States only hits North Vietnam territory with air units, it'll keep China out of it. But that's the big thing for the turn is Vietnam has escalated big time. And the United States pretty much guaranteed to intervene now that North Vietnam has invaded. So see how that goes. Space race is continuing to go in NATO's favor. The United States only needs 10 more points and they will reach they won the space race by reaching the moon first. Soviets still have 50-some points to go. And then Anzac has joined the nuclear club. They have a nuclear weapon right there. And that was it for the turn. So we'll come back a little later with an update on Vietnam and the next proxy war. Alright, the fall of 1967. This will be a pretty quick update. Because there's only one conflict going on right now in Vietnam, so. The battle for influence in Africa, it's been going solidly the Soviet way for the last several turns, like Mozambique. U.S. was up on the Soviets 5-2, I think, or maybe it was 1, I don't know, but the Soviets and Mozambique have either won or tied every freaking roll and caught up, so now it's 5-5. And in northern Algeria, the United States has just been absolutely getting freaking demolished. The United States won the first influence roll, and then the Soviets have won the next 5. It's now 5-1, so the United States, in terms of influencing Africa, has been getting its ass kicked. And then the only thing in Europe is France has started construction of its nuclear program, started a nuclear reactor in Paris. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Arab states and Israel building up. South Asian Confederation rebuilding from the Second Indo-Pakistan War. Put out a fighter. Started its Air Force for the first time, and its Navy, putting out a fighter and 2 destroyers. The main action has been in Vietnam. North Vietnam, in conjunction with the Viet Cong forces, have pretty much taken all of South Vietnam with the exception of Saigon. And this territory right here, mostly because of American presence and firepower. North Vietnam and Viet Cong tried to attack the Americans here, even though the Americans were outnumbered almost 4-1. The overwhelming American firepower beat the attack off. And the second wave of American forces in Saigon moved out, took this province just north of Saigon. America still trying to build up enough mass to just go on the offensive across the board. Right now, it only has the mass to do limited offensives right now against the North Vietnam and Viet Cong numbers. What has been really successful is the American B-52 carpet bombing campaign in North Vietnam. The last 3 turns, North Vietnam has not gotten any reinforcements whatsoever. Literally everything North Vietnam puts on the board, the last 3 turns have been destroyed by the American B-52 bomber raids. So, American bombing campaign has been massively successful, and causing North Vietnam to spend like 75% of its money on air power and air defense to try to counter the American B-52 bomber raids. So that's been very effective. Like the last 3 turns, North Vietnam has gotten 0 reinforcements. And that's really helped with the number situation between North Vietnam and the United States / South Vietnam. But the big event for this turn is the 3rd Arab-Israeli conflict begins. This will be the last of the Israeli conflicts. Israel's defending on the defensive this time. Arab states are attacking. The goal, the Arab states have to retake the Sinai. Israel has to hold it and hold its home country as well. This is a proxy war, so therefore this is a victory point. And with NATO and Warsaw tied at 3 points apiece, this will be a tiebreaker. So we'll get to rolling some dice and figure out who wins the third Arab-Israeli conflict. It's going to be a bloodbath. Both the Arab states and Israel both their militaries are going to be pretty much decimated, just like the last one. So, looking forward to it. Also looking forward to seeing who the hell wins Mozambique. But we'll come back next turn and see who wins it all. Alright, it's spring of 1968. And the Americans managed to win Mozambique, but then the Soviets won northern Algeria. So it's still tied, 3 territories to 3 territories. NATO has Madagascar, Mozambique, and Nigeria, while the Warsaw Pact has South Africa, Libya, and northern Algeria. The third Arab-Israeli conflict is over. The Israelis just barely managed to squeak it out of victory. Managed to hold both Israel and the Sinai. And that is a proxy war, so that's a victory point for NATO. So NATO pulled out ahead again. It's got 4 points to Warsaw's 3. So NATO just needs 1 more point to win this thing. Now, due to terms of the agreement, Israel does have to give up the Sinai, so they'll have to pull these forces back into Israel, and the Arab states will get the Sinai back. But that is it for the Arab-Israeli conflict, so Israel finally gets to sit back and relax, doesn't have to worry about attack. Over in Vietnam, the American bombing campaign in North Vietnam continues to hurt the North Vietnamese. That now makes the 4th turn in a row that North Vietnam has received 0 reinforcements, because whatever they put on the board, the American B-52s destroy it. Not to say it hasn't been without American losses. I think America's lost somewhere around 3 fighters and 2 tactical bombers doing it, but the American-controlled territory continues to spread as America lands more and more troops. So America's now secured a corridor between Saigon all the way up to this northern province. So they've pretty much secured about half of the Vietnam coast. America's taken some losses, but the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces have taken substantially more. American firepower, particularly in its air power, is just brutal to have to try to stand against. France continues its nuclear program, advancing its nuclear reactor, but the political event for this turn, as you can see, there's 2 rebel roundels in Czechoslovakia. It's because the Prague Spring has begun. Basically, Czechoslovakia has more or less revolted against the Soviet bloc, demanding reforms in the government for greater freedoms. And, well, the Eastern Bloc nations have to put it down. Now, these are partisans. It's not a full-on rebellion. It's a revolt. So these are partisans. So what that means is the Eastern Bloc forces can only use infantry or mechanized infantry to go after the partisans. Can't use anything else. And then the partisans, after the Eastern Bloc forces roll their dice, the partisans, if they're still alive, have the option of, instead of shooting back, they have the option of just fading into the crowd, so to speak. But while these partisans are going on, the Eastern Bloc does not get the production of those two territories. And the Eastern Bloc has a time limit. They essentially have 2 turns to get rid of those partisans, or if they don't get rid of them in time, the reforms that the Czech citizens are demanding take effect, and the Eastern Bloc gets a permanent -1 to its production. So we'll probably be seeing the Eastern Bloc forces going after those partisans pretty heavy to get them eliminated in the time limit. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Bloodbath in the Sinai, and America continuing to build up its forces in Vietnam and push out from the coast. So I'll come back in a couple turns with another update. Alright, we're at the spring of 1969, and Prague Spring is over. The Eastern Bloc powers went in and absolutely crushed it, so no reforms for Czechoslovakia. It will remain under the iron fist of the Warsaw Pact headed by Soviets in Moscow. And then in Vietnam, the United States attacked and liberated Hue. So the United States pretty much has the entire coastline from the North Vietnamese border all the way through Saigon. So it's just the southern bit of South Vietnam South Vietnam coastline that the United States doesn't control. North Vietnam, the Viet Cong still control the interior. That is likely to change now that the United States controls most of the coastline. They can start pushing inwards. B-52 campaign continuing to hurt the North Vietnamese badly. B-52s managed to wipe out all the North Vietnam reinforcements again, so North Vietnam got no reinforcements this turn again. The only reinforcements it's getting is whatever wounded infantry it gets back from American attacks in South Vietnam. But that was pretty much it for the action this turn. The new event this turn is tensions between Soviet Union and China have hit a boiling point, so now border skirmishes in northern Manchuria / southern Siberia are now open and commencing, and both the Soviet Union and China will get a bonus if they conduct border skirmishes, so that is likely to happen. But it does signal the kind of rising tension between the various Warsaw powers. But other than that, we'll come back in a couple turns with another update. Alright, we're at the spring of 1970, and the United States moved its B-52s from Sardinia to Israel to be closer to any potential conflict. Now that the Arab-Israeli wars are over, the United States can station forces in Israel in safety. France negotiated with Canada to start construction of a uranium mine that Canada will lease to France, so France can further its nuclear program. The Soviet-Chinese border skirmish is over. See, the Soviets fared a little worse than the Chinese did in it, but the end result is both the Soviets and China get a +2 IPC bonus for the rest of the Cold War for it. And then in Vietnam, the American B-52 campaign in North Vietnam continues to just devastate the North Vietnamese forces. The last B-52 raid took out 2 infantry, an anti-air, and a fighter with 0 losses for the U.S. whatsoever. And that was America's only offensive action. The Viet Cong, hiding out in Cambodia, tried to attack these U.S. forces here. But then America scrambled every available air asset it had, and American air power was just too much for the Viet Cong to handle. The Viet Cong ended up losing 8 infantry and only inflicting 2 losses on the U.S. So it's 4-to-1 kill ratio. But that was the only action for the turn. The new thing for this turn is the United States can now move into Cambodia with ground forces, and it won't draw China into the conflict. So that's going to be a big help for the U.S. because the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese have been basically being able to use Cambodia to hide out in Cambodia and then dart across the border and attack. But now the United States can chase them into Cambodia and go after them. But the United States and ARVN forces have more or less secured the northern half of South Vietnam, so it's just the southern portion that is still in North Vietnamese / Viet Cong control. So that's it for that round. Like I said, the United States can now chase North Vietnam and the Viet Cong into Cambodia, so we'll likely see the United States do just that. So we'll see you at the next chapter. Alright, spring of 1971. And France is still building its nuclear programs, working on its uranium mine. And that's really it for Europe. Soviets are still winning the whole espionage thing in Africa. The United States could not win a influence role to save its life. But with the Soviet-China border skirmish over, both sides are withdrawing their forces from the border. Both the Soviets and China get a +2 IPC bonus out of it. Main action in Vietnam. Last turn, the United States pushed into Cambodia, created a buffer zone. So now any North Vietnamese forces, those that survived the B-52 raids, have to go all the way around to South Vietnam in order to get into South Vietnam. Last turn, the only North Vietnamese forces to survive the B-52 raids was that artillery right there. So the B-52 are continuing to be utterly devastating. This turn, the United States didn't do a whole lot of attacking. Its only attack was the B-52 raid into North Vietnam. Otherwise, the United States just kind of consolidated its forces. With the last several turns of attacking, American forces are stretched pretty thin. Pretty much if it wasn't for the overwhelming American air power, North Vietnam and Viet Cong could wipe out a good chunk of American forces because they're seriously outnumbered. It's just American air power that's keeping the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese at bay. So the only ground action was between Arvin and the Viet Cong. Arvin moved into this province, attacked the Viet Cong there, and pushed them out. So now the Viet Cong are holed up in this territory. But it looks like the United States is going to spend a couple turns building up its numbers before it resumes any kind of offensive action, at least on the ground. But the political event for this turn is the third Indo-Pakistan War has begun. So that massive force will be duking it out next turn. Well, this turn, but and this will be the last Indo-Pakistan War, and India will then have to refocus its efforts for Iran and Afghanistan, ironically. So we'll do a couple rounds and come back with the next update. Alright, we're now in the fall of 1973. And NATO has won the influence roles for Tunisia, so that now has aligned with NATO. Soviets still just preparing for the upcoming war in Afghanistan. Arab states preparing for the upcoming war in Iran. India's rebuilding and expanding its forces from the Third Pakistan War. The United States attacked and took another territory from the North Vietnamese, and then conducted its normal bombing campaign in North Vietnam. But this is the last turn for American involvement in Vietnam, so America now has to withdraw its forces from Vietnam, so South Vietnam is now completely on its own. So hopefully America did enough damage that South Vietnam can hold on, but because there's still 3 or 4 more turns left in the Vietnam War, so hopefully they can hold on, but we'll see. And because of that, because America is now out of the Vietnam War, that means China cannot intervene in the Vietnam War. And so China's started pulling its army back from the Vietnam border back towards the interior of China. And that's pretty much it. Score is still sitting at 4-3 in NATO's favor. So if NATO wins the Vietnam War, then that will be it for the Cold War. NATO will have won the Cold War. If Warsaw wins Vietnam, then they'll tie it up at 4 points apiece, and then it'll all come down to the Russo-Afghan War to decide who wins the Cold War. So it'll be very interesting. We'll see what happens. Alright, we're in the fall of 1974, and really not anything that went on in Europe. NATO got on the board in southern Algeria in the influence role. India is continuing to build up its navy. The United States is continuing its withdrawal from Vietnam, pulling its fleets back to the west coast, and continuing to evacuate its land forces from Vietnam. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces attacked and took Hue in Saigon, 2 victory points in South Vietnam. The ARVN forces from South Vietnam tried to counterattack and liberate Hue. It failed. The ARVN forces, they have to liberate both Hue and Saigon to win. They might have a chance at liberating Hue, but there's not a whole lot of hope of them being able to liberate Saigon. The North Vietnamese forces in Saigon are just too powerful. And with only 2 turns left, they don't have enough time to build up the forces to take it. So Vietnam is probably going to end in a Warsaw Pact victory, which will tie the Cold War score to 4 points to 4. The political event for this turn is the Cyprus crisis. Basically, the Arab states will be able to invade Cyprus and take it. They have to do it this turn, so they have to have the appropriate forces in place, which they did. The Arab states put down a transport and has 2 infantry here in Egypt ready to go. But that's about it. We got 2 turns left in the Phase 1 of the Cold War. So we'll come back with the last turn update and see how it goes. Alright, we just completed the spring of 1975. And the United States continues to win the influence roles in southern Algeria. And the last 2 or 3 rounds they've tied for Somalia, so that hasn't gone one way or the other. India continuing to, India completed building its fleet. China, they put down their first carrier. It's a escort carrier, not a full fleet carrier. But the main news is in Vietnam. The ARVN forces of South Vietnam, on the very last round, are able to retake, or liberate, I guess depending on how you want to quantify it, liberate Hue. But unfortunately, that is not enough to win, because the victory points are Hanoi, Hue, and Saigon, and the North Vietnamese have 2 of those 3. So it is a North Vietnamese victory. South Vietnam is no more. It'll be unified into a single country again, under Vietnam, under communism. And so what that means is the score between NATO and Warsaw is tied at 4 points each. And that is the end of Phase 1 of the Cold War. So we split the Cold War up into 2 phases. One, because there's kind of 2 distinct phases of the Cold War, and 2, to break it up, because Cold War is long enough. So Phase 1, the Cold War, is kind of more focused in Asia, between the Chinese Civil War, the French Indochina War, the Korean War, and then the Vietnam War, and then the 3 Indo-Pakistan wars. So the Cold War had a lot to do with Asia, kind of the first half. Whereas when you get in the second half, the 1980s, late 1970s and 1980s, that focus shifts more towards the Middle East with the Russo-Afghan War, the Iraq-Iran War, American intervention in Iran, the Tehran embassy hostage crisis siege thing. I mean, and there's a little bit of other stuff going on, like there'll be some stuff going on in Latin America and Panama. But Phase 2, it's primarily focused on the Middle East, so. So we'll clear some boards, like Vietnam blow up will go away. We'll clear some boards, add some new ones, and we'll jump ahead in time about 4 years, because Phase 2 starts in 1979 with the Soviet-Afghan War. So we'll see you next video with the Cold War Phase 2.